After a decade of React, is front-end a post-React world now? Oh boy. I didn't realize it had been 10 years, but it has been 10 years. I am very curious to see what this article has to say and whether or not we actually are post-React. Obviously, I'm going to have takes here, so let's see. Thank you, NewStack, for posting this. No offense to y'all, I want the free space back, so I am going to hide your top nav, which worked great as we can see. 10 years after an influential React presentation at OSCON 2014, we revisit the concepts behind React and see how well they still apply in 2024. Crazy to think it's been 10 years. Also crazy to think I got into React in 2018. I was late at the time, but now I've been around for the majority. It's kind of nuts. 10 years ago, Facebook developer Christopher Shadow, mostly known as Vuex online, VJEUX, also fun enough, the creator of Excalidraw, which is my favorite tool for doodling and drawing diagrams on a stream. I owe Vuex so much. Also created Prettier, by the way. What a legend. Revealed React, created Excalidraw, created Prettier. Possibly the single person to have had the most impact on the way I do and think about things. All of those technologies changed my life. I couldn't write on a whiteboard because my penmanship's so bad and my hands are so shaky, and Excalidraw taught me how nice whiteboarding is. I could tangent about all of this dude's projects forever. As tempting as it is, I want to read the article, so let's do that. Anyways, he gave a presentation at OSCON, which is the O'Reilly Open Source Convention, about a relatively new JS framework called React. As the NewStack's Chris Dawson noted at the time, the presentation was fascinating because it explained the concepts behind React, and not just how it worked, but why it was created. Given how dominant React has become in the front-end dev ecosystem since OSCON 2014, in this article, I'll revisit the concepts behind React and determine how well they've aged. This is especially important in 2024, when major software products like Edge have begun exploring what I'm calling a post-React approach to web development. The Microsoft Edge team is calling it HTML first. Okay, this is misleading to include here this way. I have a whole video about the Microsoft Edge React thing. That's not they're telling developers to not use React on the web. That is, Edge used React for every single little menu on their app. So if you clicked the little menu button in the corner on Edge, React would render with that. And if you clicked the favorites tab, React would render with that. But it wasn't one React app, it was a bunch of them. And having like dozens of mini React apps for your UI, not a good idea. The same way that micro front ends are in many ways bad, and things like web components are almost always terrible. They were using that wrong. And yes, if you have mostly static HTML for 15 menus instead of 15 mini React apps, that's better. But if you have one app, like, I don't know, a web app, like something like Twitter, one React instance powering the whole thing, A+, totally fine. They also have unique, I'm not going to keep ranting about it. Go watch that video if you're curious. I just don't like the way this is positioned. Hopefully this isn't telling for what we're about to read, but yeah. Also, non-React frameworks like Svelte and Solid offer increasingly viable alternatives to front-end developers. Yeah, not in the context of Edge, but overall, Svelte and Solid are catching up real fast. Weird to not see Vue mentioned here, but Svelte and Solid are killing it. Why React took web dev by storm in 2014. In Christopher's 2014 presentation, he explained that the genesis for React came from an extension of PHP that Facebook had released as an open source software project in February 2010, called XHP. We extended the PHP syntax in order to put XML inside of it, Jadot said. This was done mainly for security reasons, but it also resulted in, quote, a very fast iteration cycle. Huge. The goal here was to make it so you could write more code, so to speak, specifically HTML, inside of PHP. And it made it way easier to contain your concerns in one place. The idea of model view controller had infected the brains of all software devs at the time, but when they put XHP inside of PHP and they allowed you to use XML directly, they realized having your backend code, having your HTML, having your styles and all that in one place actually made iteration much easier and maintenance much better. Turns out, separating your stuff arbitrarily by the technologies instead of by the actual concerns of your application might not have been the best idea, and React pushed that way further. So let's see where we end up. However, because it was PHP, a server-side language, every time something changed, the page would need to re-render completely. So the Facebook team decided to move a lot of the application logic of XHP into JS, the browser's native scripting language, because they wanted to avoid those round trips from the server to the client, back to the server, back to the client, etc. They then looked for ways to optimize the way the JavaScript code was being used. I tend to think of React as version control for the DOM. Oh, Christopher, what a mind-boggling way to think about a JavaScript framework. Long story short, they ended up creating a JavaScript library called React, the key innovation being the creation of a virtual DOM. Virtual DOMs are still a very much new idea with React. The idea that you could run something as big as the DOM in JavaScript just to update the DOM less often, mind-blowing at the time. It just felt like it couldn't work and it had to be really slow. And we realized it was great, use it for everything. Then we realized it's not perfect and started pulling back a bit. But I'm curious how the virtual DOM comes up throughout this. The DOM, as Wikipedia nicely explains it, is an object-oriented representation of an HTML document that acts as an interface between the JS and the document itself. As Trudeau explains, React gives you two virtual copies of the DOM, a before and after for each interaction, from which you run a diffing process to establish what exactly has changed. This is the key for React. When you change something, even if it re-renders in the JavaScript code, it doesn't actually update the DOM unless something changed. So the virtual DOM notices that this node got deleted and this one got added, or the opposite. Or this one got added, this one got removed. So this yellow one appears here, this red one's gone. So now when you diff them, you see the difference here. So we only have to apply that. Yeah, as they said here, React only applies to changes to the actual DOM, meaning only a portion of the DOM is changed while the rest stays as is. That in turn means only a portion of the web page needs to be re-rendered for the end user. Trudeau had a nifty quote that summed up the benefits of React. I think of it as a virtual control for the DOM. So in this framing, React's kind of like Git for the front end. That's a bit of a reach. The idea of diffing, fine, but it's not like Git for the front end. Another innovation was the creation of JSX. I've been thinking a lot about how JSX happened, because if you were to try and extend JavaScript syntax today, you'd be fucked because TypeScript would never merge it. But since TypeScript had to compete with Flow and wanted React users, they had to add JSX support to TypeScript, which is why now JSX is almost a forced standard. Because if you want TypeScript support and you want markup syntax in your JavaScript, the only one that TypeScript supports is JSX. So you either use that or you build your own separate thing, which sucks. That's why Solid, Astro, and React have the best TypeScript support, because all the other solutions have their own markup language, which makes it harder to get the types working. And they usually rely on things like a VS Code extension to make that possible. Even Astro has that problem to an extent, but technically Astro is using JSX, so it's a bit easier to implement. Anyways, back in 2013, Facebook's Pete Hunt described it as an optional syntax extension in case you prefer the readability of HTML to raw.js. Remember when JSX was optional and not literally the only way we write React? JSX was so controversial when it dropped. I'm happy we're over that now. One of the important ideas behind React was that it wasn't template-based, like previous popular frameworks. Remember before I said the MVC model? You had a template, you had a model, and you had the controller, which actually bound everything together. So you have to write the template first and then write the way things change it, rather than the state resulting in the actual output code. There's a thing I've seen a lot, and I see it being talked about now more than ever, which is UI equals F state. This is meant to represent that the UI is a function of your state. So you pass your state into a function and out comes the UI, rather than UI plus state plus bindings equals app, which is how most things worked before. You had the UI, you had the state, and then you had the way that it was all bound together, and then an app would hopefully magically come out of that. But the non-deterministic relationship between these things sucked, whereas UI equals F state was a lot easier to manage, comprehend, change, everything else that we do in modern applications. It made it way easier to make a giant app with a lot of people contributing without constantly breaking things because you thought a certain string would be in a certain place and it wasn't. Also showcased the value of a lot of functional mindset and programming techniques. As they say here, since it wasn't template-based like popular frameworks at the time, Ruby on Rails and Django are used as examples. As Hunt noted, React approaches building user interfaces differently by breaking them into components, which means React uses a real, fully featured programming language to render views. Sure that the fully featured programming language thing got us some trouble, but anyways. React really did provide a revolutionary method of developing web apps, and it was especially suited to large applications where data changed a lot. Influential developers began to take note, and the adoption of React grew in 2014. James Long, who was at Mozilla at the time, summed up the buoyant mood around React with a May 2014 post entitled, "Removing User Interface Complexity," or "Why React is Awesome." This sounds like a very fun post. I might go back to this one in the near future. So that sounds very fun. Let me know in the comments if I should read this article from 10 years ago about why React is awesome. React's critics. Despite its popularity, it didn't take long for complaints to start rolling in about React. By the end of 2015, some devs were already complaining of React fatigue because of the steep learning curve. In 2015 of December, Eric Clemens wrote, "Ultimately, the problem is that by choosing React and also inherently JSX, you've unwittingly opted into a confusing nest of build tools, boilerplate, linters, and time sinks to deal with before you ever get to create anything." And then Create React App was invented, and with it came a lot of new patterns that were really cool. We'll get to that in a bit, I'm sure. Developers also had issues with the way React handled state management. Here's Charlie Crawford on the new stack in August 2016. Problems start occurring when the component tree gets tall, and you have components that are far from each other in the tree, and one component is not a descendant of another, and both components depend on the same bit of state. By 2017, some influential devs were starting to regularly voice complaints about React. In August of 2017, Alex Russell, who at the time was still working at Google's Chrome team, kicked back against the notion that the virtual DOM was fast. Oh, Alex Russell. Fun fact, Alex Russell and I had a debate in 2020 on the merits and limitations of React and single-page apps. This was a debate I had with Alex where he talked 3 times more than me about why React is evil, and I did my best to defend it. Intentionally took some L's to try and bridge the gap. Interesting convo, was a live debate in person. Worth watching if you want to see his takes. We don't agree on a lot of these things. He also pushed web components really hard. I think they were his spec. Iffy stuff overall. I have a whole bunch of stuff where I talk about the average React dev and why his bias exists the way it does. He spends his time looking at the most broken React apps in the world. He's biased for a reason. It's a good reason. But yeah, we don't always agree. I'm not saying React was a mistake, but its apologists need to reckon honestly with what it's done to the ecosystem. I don't agree. I think it made development in the ecosystem overall significantly better and allowed us to evolve the web way faster. He also complained that the diffing in the VDOM is slow compared to other frameworks. Other frameworks are going faster, like Svelte, Lit, Vue, etc., but by taking different approaches. But they get similar surface syntax, and they are much smaller. Some of the React issues that developers have complained about over the past decade have either dissipated or been resolved. For instance, the learning curve isn't much of an issue nowadays, especially with the new React docs. React.dev is one of the best learning experiences for any programming tool or technology. This set an insanely high bar for learning how to write any form of code. Even if you're an experienced React dev, it's worth looking through this. But if you're new to React or want to learn it, blast through this quick. You'll learn a ton. A lot of new front-end devs have come onto the market since 2014, and many started out by learning React. What was the number at ReactConf? Like 60% of devs start learning React, which is nuts. There have also been good solutions to the state management issues, like Redux or React's Context API. I wouldn't call those the good solutions, but they're good enough. Big fan of things like Zustand, but to each their own. Even with the performance issues, React has its defenders. Chief among them is the company Vercel, which runs the industry's leading React framework, Next.js. In July of 2023, Vercel published a long blog post about React 18, the current stable version. The post outlined how concurrent features like transition, suspense, and React server components improve application performance. Yep, all of these features are really cool, and the fact that they're as easy to adopt, minus server components, is awesome. Transitions and suspense in particular are really cool and underrated and make things a lot better. And then server components allow you to not have to update things that don't need to be updated, which helps a lot with the diffing too. Also, I would make the argument towards poor Alex Russell that server components, by inversing the way web components worked, made the goal of them significantly more achievable. But even if those features do improve performance, has that come at the expense of complexity? Some, including Netlify CEO Matt Billman, think so. 2 I's instead of 2 L's. By the way, Matt's awesome. I've had a lot of great conversations with him. Huge shout out to Matt. In January this year, Billman used a tweet from Vercel's CEO Guillermo Roche to poke fun at the seeming complexity of Vercel, and by extension, React. Next, passing a promise from an RSC into a client component that hydrates the initial state of an SPA data fetching layer like SWR, essentially an on-the-fly ergonomic streaming API server. Okay, I get why he's poking fun, because Guillermo shoved in all the buzzwords there, but let me show you why this is actually cool. This is a basic React Next.js server component example. I have 2 files that matter. Page.tsx, which is a server component, so this will only run on the server, and then this component, client example, tagged use client. So this does ship JS to the client. It runs on both, but it ships JS to the client. So this code only runs on the server. I can prove that by bun dev, going here, and you see, if I open my console, no logs in here. But if I go to my terminal, this only runs on the server. If I was to use client up top here, now it runs in both. See, this only runs on the server? No, it doesn't, because I put use client there. The composability is magic. Watch my Dan Abramov reaction video if you want a deeper understanding of how cool this is. But I want to showcase some of the cool functionality that exists within here. The promise thing is nuts. Let's say that I want to return a message later on. So I'll make a promise, async function get message, and I want to wait for an amount of time. So we're going to do async, or I'll just do function wait for, get the autocomplete. Cool. So we'll do a wait for, we'll make it a bit longer, 2000, and then hello from the server. We need to do something with this though. So we're going to go to the client component. We're going to give this props, message string. Cool. So now we have props, message string. I'll leave the counter. But we're going to put here props.message. So if I want to pass this message equals get message, that's not going to work because I have to await this. I can do this, but you have to do it in an async function. So I have to make this async. And now if I go to load this page, it takes a second to load. Well, 2 seconds specifically. If I close and reopen, you'll see it's waiting. Then this happens. What if I don't want to have to wait? What if I want to get this rendered ASAP and then deal with this message later? Here's where the React passing promise thing gets really fun. If I change this to be promise string, now I can make this not async anymore, and I can delete this await. And now I'm passing the promise down. I can't just render that. In fact, if I try, I'm quite curious what happens. Console. Hello from the server. But theoretically, I have this as a promise, so I don't have to just put that there like that. What we could do is put this in state. So const message set message equals use state string or null. And then in this use effect, which I have to import, there we go. On the dot then, because this promise comes down, I'm going to set the message. So now when I render, it comes through like that. And I can even do message or here's what we'll do. If no message, return div loading. That's so cool. Do you guys understand how insanely fucking cool that is? This is client-side code that takes a promise as a prop, and I can pass that promise from the server. There's a lot of fun terms and technologies and things going on here, and I understand the desire to talk about all those, but the reality of taking something like a promise, like an async thing like this, be it a data fetch, be it something from a database, be it any of the many other things you might need, the ability to return something to the user and then later return this promise and have React just handle it. Unbelievable. It's so fucking cool. I love this so much. And sure, you can call me a Vercel shill all you want. They're not paying me for this video. They have paid me in the past, but not for this one. This is mind-blowing. I love this still. The first time I saw that this just worked, melted my brain. Obviously, you could use suspense and other things to these different ways, but the ability to pass a promise to the client to do something with it, and it just works like a normal promise, unmatched. You can also use if you want to suspend on it, yes. So if I was to const message equals use props.message, I have to import this from React now. Now it's going to block the render of this component until that comes through, but you can fix that with a suspense. So if I put a suspense around this, because now this loading happens from the server, and then when the client gets everything else, it renders the rest. It's so cool. You just call use, and now this component won't render until it gets the data. I can delete that loading state because it'll never get hit. And I can even delete this use effect because it will, again, never get hit because this promise gets resolved in here. And until then, it fires the suspense above. So cool. So cool. And if you wanted to lower the suspense boundary deeper in because you want to show the counter immediately, but you want to show the rest later, we can do that too. We can have a function message, and this takes in the same thing. Again, it needs to be a promise for string. Now we have this. It's not props message rendering, it's just message. And I can put this as a suspense here and then render message with the message equals props.message. Import suspense. I'm even going to get rid of the fallbacks. I don't want that here. Cool. Get rid of the suspense up here as well. And now I refresh. I've improved it by reopening. We get this immediately. And then this message comes in after. So I can actually be incrementing the count while I wait for that promise to resolve. It's so good. Nothing has this level of composability. It's part of why React always wins. It's just so composable and flexible. Nothing else does this to this level. Everything else can let you make a promise that returns more markup, but the idea of a promise that you just pass to the client and you can just pass around your React tree is so cool. And you can move the suspense boundary wherever you want the loading to be. Like if I change my mind and I want this to load here instead, is all it takes. Come on, do the import. There we go. And now the whole thing loads while it waits for that to resolve. It's so easy to do stuff like that. No other framework has made it this easy to choose where these behaviors occur. 10 out of 10, no notes, play with React more. You can poke all the fun you want to at this Guillermo tweet, but the flexibility here is unreal. And make fun of all the buzzwords, the actual reality of just passing a promise to a component and being able to call use to have it, it feels so elegant and simple, and it makes the logic around your stuff way easier to deal with. So I find it hard to talk shit about these things and also use effect at the same time, because use effect's a type of complexity that was necessary on the client, and this allows you to defer those things off of the client and make life much simpler. So yeah, to each their own, but I think this is awesome. Back to the article. It should be noted that Netlify is a direct competitor of Vercel. During that presentation, Billman pitched Astro as a much simpler framework alternative to Next.js. While Astro does allow users to integrate React, they can also choose alternative UI frameworks like Vue, Svelte, and Solid. Just this week, Netlify and Astro announced a formal partnership, so we can expect more of the keep it simple narrative from Netlify. Astro also announced server islands since this post was written, which is a really cool way to do some of the stuff I just showed. Not as composable or powerful, but way easier to adopt if you don't have a server running JavaScript like we do here. So, conclusion. Post-React or no? It's too early to proclaim that we're in a post-React front-end landscape, because React and associated frameworks like Next are still enormously popular and growing in popularity, to be clear. It's not like they hit this point and they're slowly dying. The growth is still going. They are still getting more popular every day. But there is a sense that developers have viable alternative approaches to choose from now. Neither Astro nor Svelte use a virtual DOM approach, so developers can now choose a web framework that doesn't rely on React, although Astro still has React as an option. I love the use of Astro and Svelte here because both are learning a ton of lessons from React right now. Svelte realized that their way of doing state was not composable enough, especially outside of a Svelte file, so they've now introduced runes, which are their equivalent of hooks, which are way more composable. Astro realized that having static for most of your page with dynamic streaming for parts of your page is really valuable. So they made server islands as their alternative to what Vercel and Next were doing with partial pre-rendering. But all of these solutions are learning a ton from not just what React did right in 2014, but what React's doing differently right now. We're all still trying to catch up with React because every time that gap closes in, React does some revolutionary shit, like let you pass a promise from the server to the client as a prop and it just works. These are the things that leave React in the lead, because you can copy the DX and the functionality and the behaviors and all of those things in other frameworks like Astro, Svelte, Vue, Solid, whatever. But the magic is that they invent these new simple ways of composing applications that then take us 5+ years to catch up to after. So sure, React of 2014 has been caught up to and even surpassed by Astro, Svelte, Vue, these other things. But React of today and React of the future, still really far ahead in my opinion. Also, the HTML first approach that Edge pursued, as I mentioned before, there's reasons for that make a lot of sense. Apparently, Alex Russell's a member of that team. That explains so much. Either way, front-end development is no longer as tied to React as it was just a few years ago. If you're a new web developer entering the profession, you might even consider eschewing React altogether. Although admittedly, that will diminish your short-term job prospects. But it's at least an option to seriously consider. It might even help you land a job with a forward-thinking employer. No. I have a video. Stop using new technologies unless you really want to. This is one of my best videos, and nobody gave a shit. It bombed. 34K, 3 weeks is one of my worst performing videos of the year because people don't want to hear that you shouldn't use new tech. I don't recommend you actually adopt new technologies unless you really, really want to. Learning something new is something you should do either for fun or because the new thing is so enticing and exciting to you that you feel bad not learning it. But you shouldn't be learning new things because you're scared of falling behind. That mindset's bullshit. Watch this video if you want to hear me rant all about that. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. You know what? I'll put that there now so I don't forget to. Watch that vid if you think I recommend too many new things, because I don't. And if your goal is to get a job, learn old things. Learn something that's React or older. If you really want to get a job ASAP, go learn COBOL or some shit, something ancient. Job opportunities and productivity opportunities tend to come from using old-ish solutions. There's a reason PHP has this huge wave right now of indie hackers, because old things are great. They're stable. They work really well. If you really want to play with the new thing, though, go ahead. I think that's all I have to say about this one. Accuse me of shilling in the comments. And until next time, peace, nerds.